Hello and welcome to the podcast. My granny is Irish. This week we have Michael Murphy back on from before Christmas, who is coming in from a very cold London, I'm told. Did you have, and we know that your parents are Irish. Did you have a good Christmas and Happy New Year, Michael?
Thank you, Laura. I was just thinking that means I have two Irish grannies, so I should be an honorary
Yeah.
English.
Yes.
Yeah, yeah, I had a
Well,
lovely Christmas. Thank you.
oh,
Yeah.
good. Well, I think, as I said to you over the break, I was over in London twice since we last spoke. And just at the weekend, when I was walking through Dublin Airport, I could spot all the English cousins returning from their Irish visits. So I don't know how many. Did you come over to Christmas or come over to Ireland much over Christmas when you were young?
No, when I was young, there were one or two Christmases over in Ireland. Yeah, I remember one when I was like 9 or 10, and I watched the film Psycho by Alfred Hitchcock for the first time. So that was a real
That was
landmark in my
right.
in my trajectory of trauma, which has just continued
Yeah,
ever
that
since.
genuinely sounds traumatic. Yeah, mind you, I think Home Alone is traumatic. Well, I could see them all. I could spot them from a mile away. The English cousins. That's the journey my children used to do, but of course they are here now. But we are going to in amongst the Christmas movies. Obviously, Donald Trump has been very busy over the new year. We're going to talk immigration and whether Britain could miraculously hit net zero immigration and whether that matters. How much it's the New Year's resolutions time. So we're wondering, a lot of people I think are trying to cut down on their social media, but not the likes of Nick Fuentes, we might chat about. And we might get to touch on the increasing gap between young men and young women, young men voting to the right and young women voting to the left. But first of all, turning to President Trump and his kidnapping or arrest or whatever word you wanted to use of the president of Venezuela. Were you really upset about this? Did you have to dry your eyes?
No, I haven't lost too much sleep over Nicolas Maduro being spirited away from his military compound in Caracas to New York to face the music, as it were, for trials of including drug smuggling and narco terrorism, which by all accounts are like legitimate charges. So no, I wasn't too upset about that. I did think that it was a departure, obviously, from what we're used to in terms of how these sort of disputes would usually be handled. And I think that it's highly significant in that the previous rule book seems to have been completely torn up in spectacular fashion, and I think that the reasons that it's been done are, there's people are talking about America's claims on the oil in Venezuela, and to this being an effort to stop drug smuggling into the United States. But I think that the evidence points to this being um, a kind of a propagandistic exercise, a show of force to put the world on notice, especially other powers in the Western Hemisphere on notice that this could potentially happen to them. That America is not afraid to use kinetic force when it meets an immovable object, as it were, as Nicolas Maduro seemed to be. Whether he actually was, I suspect he was actually much more willing to negotiate than the American administration has made out.
Well, I think, yeah. I mean, look, I think I definitely haven't been losing much sleep over it. But the rule book always seems to be, and when people start talking about a rules based international order, is that the West is very limited and limits themselves in relation to taking action, but very few of the other countries that are led by people like Maduro care much about the rules based, international order. And also the fact that it's essentially particularly things like the European Convention on Human Rights, I think has been weaponized against Europe to weaken it. Certainly culturally, which we can touch on in relation to immigration. But I mean, why? Obviously, there's two factions I think that have a problem with it. At first, seem to be what I would call the usual suspects in the West. Those on the left of the political spectrum, that seem pretty upset that this guy, who I don't think had any democratic legitimacy, has been removed so effectively by President Trump. And also, will this create a strain within the MAGA America First coalition, which I think has been being stretched now over the last year. It was an amazing coalition that Trump put together in order to win his second term. And like all coalitions, they get strained. Israel has certainly has been a pressure point for sure. But it seems that, I don't think America First doesn't mean America only. And also, if your country is being flooded by, foreign dictators with cocaine, which has caused the deaths of hundreds of thousands of your own citizens, I think that definitely falls within America First.
Yeah, I think that the main concern amongst the commentators that I would respect and defer to on this is that this could drag America into a quagmire in its backyard, and it doesn't seem like the sort of day after has been particularly well thought out. The Trump administration said well, Donald Trump himself said that they were going to run Venezuela. What exactly that means is anyone's guess, but the administration has signaled that it's going to work with Maduro's deputy, who is essentially implicated in all of the activities, the illegal activities that Maduro was, and so it seems like they've had regime change in name only. Really,
Yeah.
they've yanked Maduro out and they've put Maduro 2.0 in, and so it doesn't. It's not obvious what they've accomplished by that. Now, I think the success or otherwise of this operation, it has to be judged on what follows in Venezuela. There are um, you know, a very there is a vast ecosystem of armed militias of one kind or another in Venezuela, of drug smugglers, of army, military factions, and all the rest of it, and even Cuban security services, who I believe some of whom were killed in the raid. And so it's and also vast amounts of drugs and natural resources. So I think that this has the potential, if a power vacuum ensues, to spill over into a conflict that could fast get away from
Yes.
what the administration had envisaged. So I think that's and also, just on a broader perspective, that's not necessarily in America's interest to be dragged into something like that, because it diverts attention that they could be paying to China, which really is it should be the only game in town for America's sort of foreign policy establishment, if they want to maintain their status as a sort of global hegemon or power. So I think that what is concerning is the apparent sort of shallowness of the rationale. There was a photo op of Marco Rubio and Pete Hegseth in a sort of mock-up control center in Mar-a-Lago, looking like they were coordinating things from there. And the news has come out that Maduro was mocking Donald Trump's dance moves, and that may have tipped the dial. against
Yeah,
him.
he's very transactional, and everything is personal for Trump, right? It's not a question of principles, or even necessarily ideology. But I mean, America is in the business of removing Latin dictators. I mean, that is what they do. But yes,
Often with a bit more subtlety.
yes.
But
Well,
the
Trump isn't known for a subtlety, right? He's dispensed with that.
No, although he's, when he, in his first term, there were foreign policy hawks who were keen on regime change in Venezuela, and it was Donald Trump who was actually the dove at the time, who was the person who had won his campaign off the back of no more foreign wars. And so that seems to have markedly shifted this time round, and so his appetite for risk and foreign adventures seems to have grown significantly. So I think that the MAGA base, you obviously have people like Marjorie Taylor Greene who are now opposing most of the things that Donald Trump has done in the last few months. That is the isolationist core that he won on and surrounded himself with. So I think that if this turns out to be a short, swift, snappy operation, and the next dispensation in Venezuela is somebody with whom America feels they can do business with, then that's one thing. But if they get dragged in and they have to follow up with boots on the ground or further operations, then I think that has the potential to cause a major rift in the MAGA base.
Yeah, I don't think he would get away with that. But we'll see. As you said, containment is just as difficult, I think, as radical change. So we will see if he can
Well, he
contain
might
it.
not have a choice. You break
Mm.
it, you buy it, as they say. So
Well,
he's
yeah, he isn't limited though by any sort of moral qualms, right? I mean, he pulled them out of Afghanistan. He'll lead them to it if necessary. But it'll. I mean, as you say, the messaging and the symbolism of it has certainly been a huge victory. I think. It's been a long time since you've just seen something sort of as effective as that removal. I think the whole military operation, excluding the planning, took about 88 minutes. And I guess it's hard when you've got, the American military. They like to be kept busy, so that's how you end up in places like Iraq and Afghanistan, because there's constant pressure to use their military hardware. So I mean, it'll be interesting to see what happens there, and especially politically in terms of what it does to the MAGA coalition. But turning to Britain, to the United Kingdom, I noticed there was an interesting article that I saw, and I couldn't quite believe my eyes. And this was from Fraser Nelson, who had previously extolled the virtues of the British integration miracle, which I have a lot of. I'm very suspect about, but he had a piece, and this is Nelson writes for the Times now. He used to write for the Telegraph, saying that the Britain's immigration figures may well hit net zero in the coming year, and that this would obviously have a huge impact on Reform, who are running on a basis that immigration is out of control. Um, and so I'm just wondering how likely would it be that Britain would hit net migration, and even if they did, would it really make any difference considering the amount of immigration that has occurred in Britain up until now, and also even that phrase net migration, which is the number of people out less the number of people in, is even a fair analysis.
Yeah, I'm quite skeptical of the point that Fraser Nelson made in that article. I think you're right to question the validity of net migration, because the devil really is in the details. So I think in the year up to 2025, nearly 900,000 people have arrived in the country, or 800,000, and it's 500,000 people left, and that's where he's getting that figure from. Now, 200,000 of the people who left are British citizens. So, there's been a massive exodus in the past year of wealthy people, obviously, who will only be a small proportion of that. But if we're losing 200,000 British citizens and we're gaining 300,000 or 400,000 people from the developing world, who we know are going to be a net drag on welfare, and potentially a higher risk for other things that we care about, like crime, then that's not really a great deal. So it's not only about a question of quantity, but also the quality of the people that are coming in and going. Um, I think that it's very hard to say whether we could hit net zero migration. It's just quite over determined at this stage. There's so many factors to take into account. But I think it's to some extent encouraging that a big number of those, a large proportion of the people who have left are also non-British citizens from the developing world who people broadly want to see less of that kind of immigration into the country for all sorts of reasons, ranging from assimilation, which I wouldn't go as far as to describe as a miracle, and crime, and people feeling generally estranged from their homes and their communities. So I think that, yeah, I very much doubt that we will hit net zero. There's also the small boats problem, which hasn't gone away, and the
Yes.
figures are pretty much the same as they have been the last few years, which Labour doesn't have any solution for, and in fact, it by definition cannot solve until it pulls the levers that it's unwilling to pull in relation to reforming our legislation around human rights. So I think that the Fraser Nelson, I'm a big supporter of. I think he's a brilliant journalist, but I think he's a slightly Panglossian view of this issue, and it's unlikely to go away anytime soon, especially under this government.
Yeah, so the numbers that he talks about is that there's about 400,000 immigrants leaving. So they've obviously come and then they're leaving, and a quarter of a million British citizens, and I think also leaving. So as you say, look, if everybody wants migration or immigration down, and if those numbers go down, that is definitely a good thing. But looking at the 250,000 citizens, and there was quite a lot of discussion online about this. I didn't see a huge amount in the brochures because the numbers that I wrote or read about were that they were young, they were sort of under 30, under 35, and then there was some dispute about that. I mean, you can tell me about perhaps your own experience, because certainly in the Irish Times, a lot of, loads of pieces are, out of the 30 people that graduated in my year, I'm the only one person, I'm the only person staying. And clearly, I think, if you've got, now, that is more common to Ireland than I think than it has been in Britain. But I think if you're losing, it does call into question what kind of country are you if you lose sort of 250,000 of your own citizens, especially young, perhaps well-educated citizens, and then they're replaced by, even 200,000 far less educated workers from elsewhere. I mean, what have your experience, even personally, of friends staying or going, or a lot of your, because you're 15 years younger than me, are a lot of your friends, are they still thinking of staying, or have many up sticks and left?
Most of my friends don't plan to leave anytime soon. Some are eyeing up options in Europe and in America. I suspect that my sample isn't probably representative of writ large the
Yes.
young, ambitious population of Britain. I'd say that a lot of people are considering their options, seeing as the Labour government has introduced taxes in the last year that essentially penalise the productive, the wealth creators, and and to subsidise an ever growing and welfare state. And they've refused to make any, even the most modest cuts to
Yeah.
welfare. So that's only going in one direction. And it completely makes sense why people are packing up and going to Dubai or going off
Yes.
to, even considering Saudi Arabia and other places, because it's far more lucrative. And I think that I haven't seen the breakdown of the net migration figure that you cited, but I would suspect that in that there is a lot of those types of people who are leaving, because why, the incentives for them to stay have just been whittled down quite
Yes.
dramatically over the past year.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I mean, this is
And
this.
then the people who arrive, like you say, lower skilled workers, then further reduce the incentive of the government to pull its finger out and start to encourage, trainee schemes or anything else to boost the domestic workforce, or get the domestic workforce back into work, of which we have about 6 million currently idle.
Yes, yeah. Well, it's a huge number, and again, a huge increase in disability benefits and disability benefits amongst young people. I think you can now get a personal independent payment for anxiety or something. Arguably, there's probably a lot to be anxious about, but it's it. The burden, the welfare state seems to be getting bigger. The debt burden is getting bigger. So the numbers aren't necessarily going in the right way. And I think even if people don't leave, it can feed off a doom loop. Certainly before Christmas, a lot of the commentary was, I felt quite doomerist, and I think just if you're a young person, that's hard to be around. You don't necessarily want to be hearing that every time you wake up. I mean, how much of this? The other question then is, it is the new year, and another person we were talking about who was in the Times is a guy called James Marriott, who I also think is very interesting. He's one of these what you might call anti-tech people, or anti-tech people. But and I think it feeds off this idea of, doomerism and the commentariat, how sort of negative you can get. Because he had a piece saying, I think it was in the new year, just how novelty and saying sort of the most outrageous things you possibly can is now sort of an industry of itself. The relentless desire for novelty fuels extremism. And I think I ended up writing two pieces on Nick Fuentes, who's certainly in the sort of extreme industry. How much do you think that novelty on social media is driving sort of people either to the extreme right or to the extreme left? And do you think we should all sort of put our phones away?
Well, if I could answer those in reverse order, yes, I do think we should put our phones away. I've been doing that over Christmas, and I can
Yeah.
recommend it. I couldn't recommend it enough. It's interesting. I think James mentioned that he's been researching a book, or writing a book rather, and so he's had a bit of time to unplug from the incessant news cycle. And I've had the same thing. And when you come back to it, a lot of it does seem so frivolous and ephemeral, and overhyped. And so I think that's very important to, touch grass, as they say, and get some distance from the noise. I would have to agree that, we are in a highly competitive and crowded information economy, if you can call it that, where people are vying for eyeballs all the time, and it pays to push the envelope, say the outrageous thing or the new thing, because that gets clicks, and that is what people want to hear. I mean, for all sorts of reasons, right? Conspiracy theories, among other things, flatter the vanity of the conspiracy theorists, because they then enter a sort of a select of the cognoscenti who know what everybody else doesn't. And that can be quite addictive. Once you believe in one as a sort of gateway drug, all your credulity just goes, you become incredibly credulous to the next one. That being said, I think what James misses is that, um, if you had followed the sort of respectable opinion in
Yeah.
among Times columnists and all the rest of it over the last decade, the world probably doesn't make very much sense to you at the moment because they've been wrong or um, blindsided by so many events because of a slightly blinkered world, or not slightly, a blinkered worldview.
Yes.
Um, and their blind spots include everything from the COVID lab leak theory to the grooming gangs to migrant crime, the way, just the fundamentals about the way the world works. Everybody was saying Putin won't invade Ukraine. It doesn't make any economic sense. So turns out that there are some things that trump economics. That Donald Trump couldn't possibly get elected. Brexit couldn't happen. And so when you have such a consistent track record of the established viewpoints and the trusted sources of authority on these things getting everything so badly wrong,
Yeah.
then it necessarily makes alternative sources of information more attractive. Now, on the one hand, you do have the Candace Owens types who, alleging that Brigitte Macron is a man, and I would say that that's, at the harebrained end of the spectrum that people would be probably best off avoiding altogether. But you do also, if you want to be, I would say, truly informed in the present moment, then you need to seek out alternative sources of information. There's just no other way around it.
Yeah.
And so while it has some of the worst, you sort of like half baked guff, it also has some of the most intelligent commentary at the moment on the fringes, on websites that maybe most people have never heard of, from thinkers that people haven't really engaged with. So and also sometimes the outrageous thing has, if it's not true, sometimes it has a grain of truth,
Well,
and
I think
it's often worth debating for its own sake to try and establish first principles of going back to, how do I know this thing I think I know? And when there's been such a sort of a series of upsets and surprises in what we thought we knew to be true. When I say we, I'm just using that in the broadest sense possible. It's only natural that people start to question other things, and I think that's on the whole quite healthy.
Yeah, look, I think we are in the business of sort of challenging the status quo and received wisdom, and also, the previous decade was so dominated by the left and by the woke, which pulled everything so extreme, and people were genuinely afraid of challenging it because of things like cancel culture, which we can go into in a minute. That if you look, you were still living in the land where, if you say men can't become women, a lot of people, the rising generation in particular, get very offended by it. But I think the pushback, just against, I think, social media and just the dominance of it in a personal capacity, I think, against phones and things like that, or phone, the phones at mealtimes, for instance, is now nearly an industry of itself. Because I was wandering through Amazon, which I don't necessarily get my books from, but obviously it has them all there listed. The latest book I got was Against the Machine, which is supposedly, I haven't read it yet, is again just this idea that the sort of the tech is an attack on our humanity itself. And I think a lot of people sort of feel that now. And there's plenty of other there's plenty of other books out there on that. There's Cal Newport has written Digital Minimalism and Deep Work, and I think people are now beginning to, I think, trying to get your attention span back, or even your focus back. And that now is nearly, I think people are understanding how difficult it can be just to, pay attention to things. And you still hear from universities now, they have to oh yeah, the English literature, students, they can't get through a full book. I mean, they genuinely cannot sit down and read a full book because they've been on Snapchat and Instagram, for their whole lives. And I think the lack of focus, just the inability to focus or read deeply, um, is definitely fueling other social and political trends. So if we again, if we look at say Fuentes on the one hand, so he obviously is not all the viewers will necessarily know him. He is a very influential he's not that young, he's 28, 29, man on the extreme right, arguably in the MAGA coalition, where he's very much, talking about ethno-nationalism. It's not about values. It's not about as long as the new immigrants adopt our culture. He's just like no immigrants, and he's quite extreme in terms of women. And the young women, um, are definitely trending to the left, particularly in the UK. There was a piece in the New Statesman saying young women are radicalizing. Britain's young women are sad, alienated, and increasingly left wing. And there was a
They're
few.
a bit better late than never on that trend.
What do you mean by that?
The New Statesman, I think, arrived a bit late, probably 10 years late to that realization.
Yes.
You know, the radicalization of young women, I think, has been quite long in the tooth now. So,
Yeah, that's what I thought. I mean, the piece sort of set it up as like the deal that the young women trending left, nobody seems to care about. Although, I mean, you would have thought something like the New Statesman would be happy about it, whereas everybody's talking about young men trending right. But what they left out is, I remember all the pieces commenting on, right wing men, conservative men, and they were all, in a state of panic, like, this is a terrible thing that young men might be voting to the right. And I'm like, no, what explain to me why that's a bad thing.
well,
Um yeah.
I think when the New Statesman, you know, is shocked by the fact that people aren't paying attention to the radicalization of young women, it's partly because, that old adage about does a fish know it's in water, and the
Yes.
culture has been so saturated with left wing shibboleths and progressive crusades against one thing or another, which, young women in particular have been manning the ramparts on. Vastly overrepresented in a lot of these trends. It seems like it was probably hard to notice it because those were the prevailing cultural headwinds that very few people questioned. And
Yes.
it's interesting. You see these think pieces now, on like acting like this is a new development, or that the radicalization thing or the novelty thing is a new is now shocking. But they were very few and far between at peak woke, in the 2000 late 2010s, for example, when
Yeah.
that would have actually been quite a brave observation because you would have been going against what was a set of sacred cows. It seems like now that the right is radicalizing, all of the sort of pennies dropped for a lot of people. And I think that these trends are in a way in a kind of dialogue, not with each other necessarily, but alongside each other, where what for the last 10 years has been the reigning orthodoxy is, and Helen Andrews has written quite eloquently about this, is what she's called the great feminization.
Yeah,
And
I've
this,
seen that one.
I think this is a big part of what wokeness was, and you can trace this back further than the 1990s in America, where women started to, if not equal the number of men, then outnumber men in certain professional industries like academia, journalism, etc. And you started to see a greater premium placed on things like harm avoidance than objectivity.
Yes.
And I think that that has been a major catalyst for a lot of the social dysfunction that we see internally in our societies. Um, you and the obvious backlash against that, if it's bad to be masculine or show masculine virtues or traits, if those are being demonized, if it's if being a straight white man is bad, if racism is the greatest sin imaginable, and the jokes are increasingly taboo. uh People feel that they can't speak their mind lest they reap the professional consequences of doing so. Well, the obvious um counter force to that is somebody like Nick Fuentes, who is a racist, is a to some extent a shock jockey or a provocateur, or I think there's more to it than that, who is willing to just come out and say, and it has to be said, he can be quite funny, and he will basically, in a sort of like, uh, just basically start slaughtering these sacred cows in a way that is often very distasteful or juvenile, and sometimes quite sinister. But he has that base because those people have been the sort of the Dostoevsky's underground man for the last 10 years, not feeling like they can express themselves, rarely sort of coming up from their hovel on 4chan or whatever part of the internet that they found, that they felt was safe for them to interact. And that was entirely predictable, that was going, had the pendulum not swung so far in one direction, a lot of this, a lot of these provocateurs would not have the would not enjoy the audiences that they do, I suspect.
Yeah, I mean, I
And
think
I
look,
think and I think also just one more thing on the I think that if we I think that our relationship with media, social media, is crucial. It's the phones that we carry around with us, and that we. I don't know the last time you checked your screen time, but sometimes when I look at it, it's quite depressing. There was one study out that the average 20-something-year-old will spend like a decade of their life looking on their phone.
yeah, but do
Um,
podcasts count? Does listening to music count? No, I'm that's a side point.
Yeah. Well, maybe, but then that's, a decade of your life spent in sort of one-way parasocial relationships where you sort of have this illusion of connection,
Yes.
but you're really just receiving monologues all the time. And I think that that's very important, but it's quite easy to dismiss actual social trends which have sometimes legitimate, sometimes illegitimate grievances behind them, and it's like, for example, I suppose the ethno nationalist trend that we're seeing now in America and in Britain, who Fuentes would be the main avatar across the pond for that, is I think if you create a society where there's a kind of apartheid,
Yeah.
for what, and it's really only in the professional or educated spheres that this became a major problem, because there wasn't anybody calling for quotas, racial or sexual quotas for bin men, or people working on oil rigs, or doing the numerous dangerous and often ill remunerated jobs that men do. It was basically a bid for the premium high status positions in our society.
Mm.
And over the last 10 years, there's been this systematic discrimination against one group in particular, which is white men.
Yeah.
And the 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 reason why identity politics was essentially given a free pass for every group except for white men was under the assumption that they are the only group who's not oppressed or who is at the top of the oppression pyramid. Um, and if you flip that pyramid and you create you can question to the extent that that even existed, but if you create a system where there is legitimate grievances of a certain group, like white men, which
Yeah.
there are, then obviously you're going to get white identity politics. I mean, it's the most predictable thing in the world. If essentially if everybody else is going to be um, clubbing together to advance their collective group-based interests, then the idea that you wouldn't see that for the main people who are being disadvantaged by that system is
Yeah.
uh, is
See,
quite optimistic.
yeah, look, just a few things on that. I mean, I agree with you. I mean, I agree with you on much of what you said. I think that there are a number. I'm always interested, though, in motivation. So, I mean, going back to the young men or the young women voting to the left. When we say to the left, we're talking quite far to the left, the Green Party, etc. And I think the trends would be very similar over here in Ireland. So, I mean, it is true that you've had at least 10, maybe even 20 years of essentially systematic discrimination against young white men. But despite all this, despite all that, if you can believe that, they actually say Britain's young women seem far more alienated from their country than their male peers and are more likely to think their country is treating them unfairly compared to older generations, which is like astonishing how, say, a young woman under the age of 25 or 30 could think that she would face greater discrimination than even her mother, say, or previous generations of women, let alone compared to young men. They also feel young women feel less connected to their country, that's Britain now, than young men, and are 21 points more likely to think that their country is racist than young men. And like I find that astonishing, and I do think much of it is definitely generated by TikTok. I mean, I really don't understand how a young woman in Britain today, despite, all of their opportunities, the fact that I do think they are favoured over young white men, could actually think that they are treated poorly compared to, as I said, their mother or indeed their brother. And that they think their country is more racist. And I mean, why they would think that is really, as I said, only a minority, surprise, surprise, 31% take pride in being British. Men of the same age are 51%. So
Yeah.
I mean, I would just genuinely like to know, first of all, why and where do they get that from? In terms of, so they very much view themselves as victims. We think the white men are probably also perhaps legitimately view themselves as victims. But in terms of, I want to get back to, though, just the other question was, if we accept that, women have had an advantage for the last 10 or 15 years. They were at the forefront, I think, of cancel culture. They probably have created a risk adverse society. I mean, arguably lockdown was the feminization of society at its very peak. Let's lock the whole place down in case we get a cold. But the enforcers of that, Michael, I still think were men, particularly older men, who, right, I mean, all the scientists more or less were, Professor Lockdown Ferguson was male. Boris Johnson was male. The Taoiseach over here at the time of lockdown, say, was male. The lead medical chief scientist was male. The gatekeepers in the universities that have discriminated against young white men are male. So even if we accept the feminization of society now, which is over and above, say, creating equal opportunities for women or legal status for women, we're talking about it really turning into an anti-risk, say, society. I still think ultimately the people who have done that have been men. They still held all the positions of power, the older boomer men. So I'm actually putting it back
Oh,
on you.
tot
It's your fault, or at least
totally.
your father's fault.
Totally, and you know, blaming women in general is a complete cop out on this. We're all in this together. It's not that you know, with women have we're living in some kind of like reverse Handmaid's Tale scenario where the men are just you know sort of like nodding along to whatever they're told by women. I think that it's slightly more subtle and insidious than that. I think that you know, the feminization of the culture is has or the sort of like a few trends have been running in tandem. And I'd be interested to hear what you think of this. One is that with the feminization of the culture and the prioritization of these virtues, and especially certain strands of feminism, which I see as sort of encouraging women to ape often the worst proclivities or characteristics of men. For example, to you know, be sexually promiscuous, to just sort of like be myopically focused on your own interests and career to the exclusion of, say, having a family. Yeah, I think that um, the the consequence of that in part has been that men have started to act more like women, and women have started to act more like men. And
Really?
so yeah, I do. So so for example, you see like let's just take like the current crop in the Irish government, for example. They are um, most of them are extremely effeminate. You'll see them sort of like clasping their hands awkwardly and sitting like this when they're getting a group photo, and you know there's no like there's a marked shift from 20 years ago when you kind of had men's men, as it were, more men's men. And I think that the part of this is that men in the professional sphere have been trying to signal that they are not a threat, and part of that is you know, acting in a slightly more effeminate way, or adopting more effeminate uh what would you say, what worldview or habits of thinking. And I think that that has been advantageous to men who want to get ahead.
Yes.
You know, like laddishness, for example, is a major health hazard if you are a professional.
Yeah.
That can get you into serious trouble. Now, I think that women similarly have been, you know, if you see like any superhero movie now or any movie with like a female protagonist, she's always implausibly beating up like a
Oh,
large
yeah, yeah,
man.
yeah, yeah, I know,
Um,
it's ridiculous. It's actually
and
ridiculous.
yeah, I mean, you know, and to the extent now that I just don't think that people have any grasp of like strength differentials or anything like that. We're living in a kind of la la land in terms of, and you know, the heroes of women are always these like you know, implausibly niche types of women who are, you know, the masters of the universe, or like anybody, you know, like the Michelle Obamas and the Oprah Winfreys of the world, this girl boss um ethos of like, you know, you can
I think you're being a bit unfair to Oprah. In fairness, she's self-made, whereas, Michelle Obama's traded on the husband's achievements, right? So, I feel
yeah,
I
well
need to
listen,
defend her.
I don't want to disparage Oprah, but yeah, so I think that has been a trend that that I've noticed anyway. And I think that that leaves people slightly, and I think, you know, probably the trans thing is just like the that taken ad absurdum, right? Is the denial of legitimate distinctions and roles that men and women, on average, not talking about individuals, tend to gravitate towards. You know, we know that, for example, that women are on average more interested in people, and men are on average more interested in things, which is why you have more male engineers, more female nurses, and people in caregiver roles. The sort of the dominant narrative has been that if which men and women do in free societies, tend to drift in those directions,
Yeah.
that is somehow the result of patriarchy or anything like that. I think it leads to um, a lot of confusion and unhappiness, and I suspect, and one of the knock-on effects of that, I think, is, you know, women and men are implicated in this as well. It's not just, men have their own issues with this, but women are either not having children or having children, want to have children too late, um, which is is their choice. However, I think that leads to a lot of what would you say? Like one theory that I find quite compelling is that, the focus on like so-called vulnerable groups, say like minorities or sexual minorities, that was the whole one of the hallmarks of woke. Is from the female perspective a kind of rerouted maternal energy that is
Okay.
frustrated and hasn't found an outlet. And
Well,
so instead of like that being localized and
yeah,
having a very tight feedback loop with a child,
yeah.
that now women are trying to save all the poor gays and the poor minorities, the ones tribe
Okay, well,
refugees.
I'm definitely going to pick you up on that because I think I've seen that floating around social media, and I'm deeply skeptical of it. But look, so the first thing I do want to say is I am actually still blaming the patriarchy for making society feminized. I think ultimately they were the gatekeepers. People who were cancelled, I suspect, by men. People who locked us down were also men. And who knows why they do it? These are the
Yeah.
white knights. Ultimately, I think men will still do whatever it takes to gain power and get on the top of the tree. And if that means screwing over everybody else below them by turning it into a very feminized society, which I don't think serves anybody's interests, like a very feminized anti-risk society, well, that's on them. And so few people are willing to call them out on it. It has
I
it,
al- I
go on.
also think that, a lot of it is nothing to do with that, and just the perennial problem that we have as slightly evolved primates of monkey see, monkey do. We copy each other. We don't want to be the odd one out, and so when there is a mass hysteria about something like COVID or BLM or whatever it is, often people are intensely mimetic. We just copy what the next
Well, no,
person's
look,
doing.
I don't think people in power are. I just think you're giving them way too much of a free pass. Like another statistic in that piece, 1 in 3, this is 31% of 16 to 25-year-old women say the conflict in Gaza is their top 3 issues, placing it above taxes and immigration. And I just think that stuff like that comes directly from TikTok. This is just because they're on their phones their whole day. I mean, why isn't, I don't
But I'd
know,
be interested to see the age breakdown, right? Because I presume that's
that's
young.
16 to
That's
25. That's
yeah,
16 to
so that's
25.
young. So that's young women, and
Yeah. That's
you know,
entirely
and
TikTok based, I suspect. I mean, and also obviously it's been driven by the media which is dominated, especially some sections of it, by women, middle class women, certainly drive much of the narrative. And look, I agree with you. The films how they flip the gender roles, and this is also I think the big push between that. I just it's so predictable now. I have to laugh with women's football and women's rugby. It's never like amazing ballet dancers or great knitters because that's too gendered. It's all like I don't have a problem. And I always say, just to be clear, with the individual female footballers or rugby players. What
yeah,
I object to is how totally artificial the push from the media is. And like, if you're not on board with women's football, like you're the problem. You're like, well, I'm not on board with women's football because I don't particularly like men's football either. I mean, it's
yeah.
just, these fashions come in the media and they can be really, really obvious to spot. But yeah. So this
There's
thing
this
though,
hilarious feigned enthusiasm
feigned
among a lot of
enthusiasm.
men
It's
for
totally,
women's football.
yeah,
In public, they'll say, "Oh, the Lionesses, aren't they great?" And
yeah.
then 3 pints in the pub, and they're rolling their eyes, and
Well, although they do win more, of course, than the men's team. So
yeah.
there is for the English
Well, there's
football
that.
team anyway. So there is that. But look. I think we underestimate the white knights out there who really annoy me. The gatekeepers I think are definitely still male, although there's a lot of female journalists which push the agenda. And again, we can talk about how we might end on I am just how the young white men can turn it around. But before we get to this, yeah, you mentioned about this maternal energy and this misguided maternal energy. I was deeply skeptical of this. I've seen this on Twitter a few times. The reason why we have woke is because none of the women are married anymore. If they were just back at that kitchen sink and in the nursery, they wouldn't be running around bothering their little noggins with Gaza and the gay friends. Look, as I said before, Harriet Beecher Stowe, who wrote Uncle Tom's Cabin, who Abraham Lincoln said, as you know, so you're the little woman that started this great war, had 7 children. So, she still managed to write a really critical book that arguably started the Civil War that ended slavery. And one of her motivating factors was the death of a child. So one of her own children died, and she got to thinking how when young slave children or babies of people who were enslaved were sold away. And there's a line in the book. One of the characters, the mother, overhears that her toddler is going to be sold to a very brutal slave trader, and Harry Peter Stowe says in the book, says literally to the reader, who of course was other white women in America at the time, how fast would you run if
But
you
I think
if you had
I
to
think
take?
that I think that kind of makes my case really for me. That she,
How?
because if women, unlike men, do have a surplus of, on average, a surplus of empathy, compassion,
Yes.
very strong desire to nurture, and if that is embodied in a bundle of joy in the form of a baby, then that's an extremely tight feedback loop that requires a lot of your bandwidth, and actually is going to inform your moral outlook on the world.
Yeah, but I don't think that's a
Whereas
bad thing. And
whereas
but my
Whereas
point, yeah.
if you don't have that, in the absence of that, I think you still have all of those tendencies, but they tend to be sucked into what are in effect abstractions. So like the climate, or like
Yeah, but you could say slavery was an abstraction, right? I personally think it was an excellent use of Harriet Beecher Stowe's maternal energy that she put
well,
into
not
both
if you're
this.
Harriet Beecher Stowe's, right?
Fagan?
Not if you're Harriet Beecher Stowe's, right? It's not an abstraction if you're living it and you've had the death of a child. I mean, there's nothing less abstract than that.
No, but I'm saying, okay. What I'm saying is, you're saying childless women, right, are running around concerning themselves with all these little issues that they should just not worry about. Whereas I'm saying Harriet Beecher Stowe had 7 children, and despite that, still managed quite a bit of political activism in the form of writing Uncle Tom's Cabin. I'm saying that
And
I
my
think you can have both. I agree with you that the maternal energy is there, and if it can get channeled to your own children, you can get channeled to your own children, your own political activism, or it can get channeled to like a dog or a cat, and there's a lot of
No,
that out.
sorry, I didn't mean to say that having a child would like mollify women, or cut them off from wider concerns. I just
Well, a
think
lot
that
of the other
it's
people are saying that.
pretty. No, I don't
That's a
believe that.
trend
I
on
think
social media for sure.
No, I don't believe that for a second. I like, that some of the most accomplished female leaders and thinkers and writers about children. I and also have not had children. I don't think this is an iron law. I just think, when you're talking about like vast trends which are incredibly complex, I think that one thing you could say is that women tend to become more conservative when they have children,
That's true in
and
general.
part of that is because if you when you have a child, it does tend to with men and women, but especially with women, it does tend to sharpen the focus, and your concerns suddenly start to get extremely practical and local, and you sort of build out from that, and you think, well, what's going to make the world a better place for my child, as opposed to what is going to satisfy my emotional desire to feel good about myself and to extend compassion to whatever group I'm subbing in for the sort of uh, that missing locus of my affections.
Yeah, look, look, I don't think compassion or empathy are bad motivating factors. I just think it's they but what they often don't take into account is, say, opportunity cost or disadvantages
Yes.
to other people. So you could say, "Oh, well, I'm really compassionate about the trans people and the poor trans people," and you're like, "Yeah, but you're not taking into account that if you put a trans person in a rape refuge, the harm you've caused to actual women." So I just don't think their analysis is right. And yeah, I mean, I think you can look the entire temperance movement in America, which brought in the prohibition,
Mm.
was fueled by married conservative women with children.
Yeah.
I don't think it hinders, as I said, it is definitely a social media trend that these childless women are running around and pushing the whole woke agenda. And if they just got married and had children, then suddenly they wouldn't be active anymore. Historically, that's just simply incorrect. Yeah, your energy is limited and your time is limited, but it can become more focused.
I
Um,
think women are more like Orwell had this line where he said, women, and especially young women, were the most rigid enforcers of party orthodoxy.
yes,
In the same way as women spearheaded the temperance movement in America, you have who are the morality police in Tehran.
yeah.
It's always been the domain of women in most societies and in the interests of women in most societies, evolutionarily, um, and sociologically, to enforce the moral code, certain type of morality. I also think that especially young women are the most anxious cohort in society or the most sensitive to social conflict and the opprobrium of their peers.
No, that's true.
They do not like to fall outside the permitted range of opinions. Mean Girls, the movie, is a sort of
Yeah.
good illustration of
But
that kind of culture. And so I think that whatever the regnant orthodoxy of the day is, whether it's the Christian family values that motivated the temperance movement, or if it's wokeism, ultimately young women do not want to be outside of the fold, and so they are going to they're going to as a group, they're going to tend to dive into that orthodoxy and enforce it.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think also that is a self-interested point, that's in their self-interest to do that evolutionarily because you need the tribe or the village later on if you do have children. You actually rely on other women and cooperation is incredibly important for that. Now, obviously, you up until 2 minutes ago, you also needed a man, ultimately to protect and provide for you to go and clonk somebody else over the head for you, or shoot a deer or something. Now, currently, the panic anyway in social conservatives is that the young men are all on the right, the young women are on the left. Nobody's going to get married. The fertility rate is going to collapse. We're all going to die. Um, so the question is, can they ever get married because the political differences are so great now? And certainly, the research out of America has young women, left wing women saying like, I wouldn't even date a Republican. I wouldn't even talk to a Republican. So I certainly think that's behind the so-called dating apocalypse. I think there's other things going on. The other thing in terms of young men, we know young women have definitely been able to affect change either because they're older males, gatekeepers were willing to force that change through on their behalf. Um, but I think the problem for young men in terms of is they don't seem to organize as well. The cooperation isn't there like it is perhaps with young women. And I think they always have a difficulty in painting themselves as victims.
Mm,
And they may well have, plenty to complain about, but
mm,
I think they've always, because young men by definition are not weak, they are physically stronger, they have a
mm,
lot more energy. It's always going to be more difficult to try and stand in front of somebody or in the media and say, well, actually, we're the weaker sex here. We're systemically have less power. I think that's going to be a big problem for it. I mean, do you think they'll either be able to organize, and even if they did, on what basis? Because playing, currency as a victim has always been difficult for young men.
yeah. I mean, I don't think that young men are going to solve these sort of social imbalances by appealing to victimhood status. I think that that's universally repulsive to both their, other young men, women. Um, it's almost a joke, really, isn't it? Like the sort of men's rights movement and all the
Well, I
rest of it.
think
So
it's
that's
just it's you're asking people to sort of lie to themselves, unfortunately, right? If you've got a 25-year, like if I have a 25-year-old man towering above me who's a lot physically stronger, and just has a lot more energy, and he's telling me he's a victim, like, it's a hard sell. It's really difficult.
mm, yeah. Um, it's not a great pickup line, and so it's not going to ingratiate them with the fairer sex either. No, I think that really, men just need to be men, really, and need to. Um, I mean, not that I'm Tony Robbins or here to give guru advice, but I think that if you look at like how it's being remedied in America, for example, you are seeing a return of sort of masculine vigor and assertiveness
Yes.
that the best embodiment of that really was, even though as camp as he is Donald Trump.
Yes.
you
Well,
know
I think
he
also kidnapping other leaders in 88 minutes in places like Venezuela, it is a testament to your strength and virility. I mean, so sometimes it just comes down to that.
Yeah, the women love it. No,
The
I'm joking.
women, they would secretly, they can't get enough of an
They'll
old
be
an old
swooning over
kidnap.
him at Mar-a-Lago. I yeah, I think that that's probably how it's going to gain some equilibrium. It's I think as well, like just more broadly, is we often have these discussions, what we have for the last decade, about like, oh, are men okay? Do we need to talk about men's mental health?
Do we? I
And
don't remember that many discussions in that.
oh, well, maybe you obviously don't watch British morning television, because
No.
it's now obligatory. Well, for the last decade, it's been obligatory for all of the men at some point to weep on a couch while they're being patted on the leg by some a sort of a caring and
Oh God.
empathizing female interviewer. I think that there's a whole fundamental misunderstanding between the sexes. Well, especially I think coming in the direction of men, as to like how um how we like what we value in terms of communication, and how we like to project ourselves and to view ourselves. I think that men like to feel competent, powerful, respected,
Yeah.
and accomplished. They like to accomplish things, and women, and also they also like, a male form of therapy is to take the piss out of each other.
Yes.
It's immensely cathartic for men to do that.
Yeah.
You'll be hard pushed to find men going to the pub to pour over the details of how bad their day has been, or how this person really upset them in this way. You just you'd be hard pressed to find a male friendship group or male dominated space that's the culture. Whereas I think with women, a lot of the time they they like to feel heard or understood, and that's a big part of, I think, female friendship is like is that feeling that you um the person you're talking to is putting themselves in your shoes, even more so than like even helping you to solve a problem.
Yeah.
um and I think that's a big discord in relationships where maybe a woman will tell her boyfriend that something's gone wrong, and he will try and suggest a solution, and she'll say, no, why are you always trying to solve the problem? And so and I think that, yeah, the things that
Well, I think it's
will
gonna be difficult as well. It's a difficult problem to solve as well if your main concern is, and I'm not is things like the Middle East. I mean, that's a
Mm.
hard problem to solve, and if that's your number one concern, you're gonna,
Well,
you're gonna be depressed for quite some time.
that's exactly right. And so, yeah, I think that, like, I think that basically it's like there are parts of life that are unfair to both sexes.
Yes.
No, everybody gets a bum deal to some extent. I mean, nobody's going to make it out alive. That's pretty
No,
grim.
that's true.
Um, and so I think that just a bit more um, women understanding really why
Are you asking for people to
effectively
show more
effectively
empathy? Because that's
effectively,
very
yeah. Well, why neutering men and sort of and henpecking them isn't in anybody's interest, and men, just dismissing women, or not considering the ways in which I know there's probably an aversion to certain feminist talking points as a result of them being shoved down everybody's throats over the last decade. But it's not like there isn't something to some of that as well.
sure.
So I think we're now arriving, even though there is great polarization, just anecdotally. I couldn't back this up with any evidence, but just it seems like we're arriving at a more of an equilibrium than we've been at
Oh,
in the last in the especially 5-6 years ago. It was incredibly it was polarized.
okay. Well, that's interesting. I mean, that is. Look, I think it's a good note to finish on, I think. But in terms of just there was there's two things I want to pick up on. One was, even if I actually missed the concern about men's health, mental health. Well, I've seen a little bit of it, and but also, even what annoys me about that, even that's fake, because they only care about men's mental health. It's not really for the men. It's because if the men, get down on themselves or they aren't cooperating, then that's bad for all the rest of society, and it's bad for women, right? When women go wrong, it's noticeable, but it's not a disaster. When men go wrong, well, a lot of people can die. So that really is the reason, I think, why they're concerned for men's mental health. Although when you're talking about some man crying, I shouldn't laugh, because actually but it's funny in the film. It always reminds me of Jerry Maguire, which is one of my favorite films. God, you're going to tell me you've never seen Jerry Maguire, aren't you?
Show me the money.
Yeah, you've seen it, right?
Of course.
Yeah, yeah, and at the end, he was watching. I forget the main guy, the footballer. He was watching another footballer getting interviewed. Do you remember? They always cry on this particular interview, and it's Gubba Junior is the actor. Oh, I can't believe I forget the um God, it's such a great film. Oh, Rod Tidwell, and he's saying, "If I ever get on that show, I'm never gonna cry. I'm never gonna cry." And of course, he gets on the show at the end of the end of the movie, and the interviewer's really pressing him and talking to him about his single mom and how his father left, and of course, Rod ends up crying on the show, and it's such a great ending. There is something about the crying man on the couch. When with that, I think it's probably the ultimate. the goal of any interviewer. Who knows why. But yes, I think what you're well, I'm glad if you think anecdotally things are
I
getting
think
better and less hostile.
I think there's a manly way to be a blubber. Like Churchill was a big blubber, and he used to cry over things like
Oh
when a
yes,
dog would do something brave on a battlefield,
yes,
um,
I've heard
or
that. No,
and
Churchill cried when he was when he was walking down the Champs Elysees after it was liberated, which I think
yeah,
is reason enough to cry. Now I've heard he was a big crier. Actually thinking about it, and my father was more of a crier. My mother was is very much like we were. I was warned, and my husband was warned in no uncertain terms were we to ever cry on our wedding day. This was not to be permitted. So yeah, I guess it's it the gender norms don't always apply. That is true about Churchill. I've forgotten about that. Well, look, I'm not giving any advice on whether people should cry or not. Certainly, Jerry Maguire is one good movie you could cry at, um, for sure. And
I don't know whether this will endear me to some of the Irish listeners, but I think as a man, if you are in search of some crying material, then
oh,
there is a great old Pathé film of Winston Churchill's funeral
oh yeah,
where
and the dock workers.
all of the dock workers
Yeah,
do a salute with the cranes at the same time, and a tear or two might have escaped
yeah.
my eyelid
That
on the occasion.
that was a different time though back then, I think.
Yes.
Okay, look, on that note, Michael, we thank you very much for your time this week. And we will see what Trump will do next. He always keeps us on the edge of our seats. Thank you very much, Michael Murphy.
Thank you for having me.